Osage and Hickory. If you were to ask any bow maker or Google what is the best wood to make a bow and arrow out of, you'd get one of these two answers. I will make two identical bows, one of each species, and I'll test the workability of the wood, the efficiency of the energy transfer from draw weight to arrow speed, the durability, and finally crown one wood as the king of all bow making woods. I want to find out if I could only use one wood to make the best hunting bow, what would I choose? The nice thing about hickory is that you don't have to chase a ring, you can just take the bark off and then that is the back of your bow. It's windier than an old people home on taco night out here. I live really close to the Pacific Ocean, and in the springtime we get these crazy windstorms, and the roof just blew off of my woodshed. I'll show you. There used to be, that metal used to be up high. Hopefully we'll get some firewood out of this windstorm. But for now, I'm gonna go work inside. I've worked with red oak, hickory. I make a lot of bows out of birch, cedar, and then this will be my first Osage. And my favorite thing about hickory is how easy it is to work with a draw knife. See this white? That's the wood, and then this greenish brown stuff, that's the cambium. Hickory is so easy because once you get to the wood, there's a distinct color change. So you stop there once you start hitting wood. And if you don't do a perfect job taking the cambium off, you call it camouflage and you just leave it there. Here's the camo-y pattern I'm getting with the cambium against the wood. And over time, the cambium will darken and it'll be a little bit higher contrast, kind of like this. This is a hickory bow I made where I left some of the cambium on. Osage, on the other hand, you actually have to chase a growth ring. This is the heartwood of the log. So it goes bark, cambium, then there's a light colored wood, and then there's the dark heartwood. So it's a lot more work to go from tree to bow when you're working with Osage, and then you have to chase a ring because wood grows like onions, and if you cut through one layer of the onion, that layer just wants to peel away. And lots of people say that they don't recommend beginners working with Osage because there's just a lot more that can go wrong. And I don't know how many bows you have to make before you're not a beginner anymore. I've made 11. So we're gonna try it anyway. Right off the bat, I have to say that Osage carves just as nice, if not nicer, with a draw knife. It's coming off in thin little ribbons. Yeah, I gotta say, that's probably the nicest wood I've ever worked with as far as using a sharp knife on wood. However, I'm having a very difficult time seeing the rings so far. Part of the reason is because the oxidized wood on the outside is dark, and so anywhere I cut is a different color. So I'm gonna actually have to take wood off of the entire backside of this bow and then look for the rings. The easiest way I can describe the transition is that there's spongy stuff in between the growth rings, and that'd be the early wood that grows in the early spring. It's definitely not easy to see, but you sort of develop an eye for it pretty quick, and you can tell when you're going through a growth ring. Now that the back of these bows are both where they need to be, I'm just gonna sand them so it's a little bit smoother and looks a little bit better. And then we can get on with the design of the bow. Now that both pieces are cut to length, I can mark the center and then 2 and 4 inches on either side. This will be my handle, and then this is where the handle fades into the limb. From this fade line to the tip of the bow, I need to draw 1/2 inch of wood. And then I can thin the limbs down to that line very fast. And then once I get it there, I'll draw my tapers and make this the shape of a bow, but it won't be bending yet because this is still too thick. The sawing and de-chunking of the wood to get it into bow shape was identical for both woods. I think that Osage is a little bit easier to carve and maybe even saw it a little bit faster. But to me, that would suggest that it's a softer wood, so I'm not sure what that will say for the performance of the finished bow, but we'll see later. I'm just gonna save this bucket for a couple of years, and then it won't be cool anymore. This is how I draw my fades. I just take a little dinner plate. It's like the small dinner plate. And then I just draw that line, and then I take a chisel, and then chisel it out. Not only does the handle need to fade from this side, it also needs to get narrower here. So these two lines are 1 inch apart, and then the limbs are 1.5 inches wide. So I'm gonna have to come in through here and cut out this so that I can get my hand around it when this is a finished bow. If I were to just take my chisel and start chiseling this out, I would probably accidentally gouge out too much into the limbs. So what I like to do is I like to take my saw and cut down to that line, and then either use my draw knife or my chisel and cut from here to that line, and then from here into that line, and that way you don't end up knocking out too much wood from the limbs. I also need to taper the ends of the limbs. So I just mark at 1 foot, and then I mark the center of the ends, and I just kind of eyeball it. And I just like to do the edges of my fingertip. It's about 1/2 inch. A lot of this gets eyeballed in the end, so these lines are just kind of an idea. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. As I get closer to the desired thickness of this bow, I'm having to switch tools from a draw knife to a rasp. This gives me a little bit more control. Some woods gum up a rasp, like birch in particular. Hickory and Osage both seem to work good with a rasp, so that doesn't seem to be any sort of issue for either of them. So check this out. If you look from end to end on this bow, you'll notice there's a slight twist. The weird thing about this one, almost every bow I make has some sort of twist, but the twist happens in the handle of this bow, which is really problematic because that's the thickest part and I'm not going to be able to undo the twist in the handle. So what I'm going to have to do is heat up the sections of the bow adjacent to the handle, and then I'll actually just use my table and clamp down to the table and try and torque it back so that the ends are straight. The easiest way I've found to get the twist out of the bow is with a heat gun, and then as it cools I'll release the clamps and it should go back to straight or straighter than it was originally. Both of these bows are ready to be tillered, so I'm just going to put them on this tree and teach them how to bend. Tillering is the same for every bow and every type of wood, so I'm just going to fly through this process. But if you don't know, I'm bending it. Any spot that's not bending enough, I'll mark with my pencil and then remove my pencil lines with a rasp and then put it back on the tree, check again, and I'm just doing that until I'm getting the desired draw weight at the desired draw length. .38. Same string, same draw length. Do everything the same and see how close this one is. 37. We're gonna call that close enough. They're within a pound of each other. Next, I'm just gonna turn these blocky handles into something that feels nice in my hands, and then we'll go test them and see how the different woods perform. Same exact bow design, same weight, same string, same arrows. Everything should be identical. I've marked both of these arrows, they're identical, at 26 inches. I'm going to draw it back to 26 inches, hold at a 45-degree angle, and then see where the arrow lands, and then I'll do the same thing with the other bow and see which one goes farther. And that will be a measurement of arrow speed and energy transfer, because some bows have, I think it's called hystasis, which is internal friction in the wood, and even though you're pulling the same amount of weight, one might transfer more energy to the arrow. So this is just a simple way to test that. I just met my lovely neighbor and he ran over the arrows. So let's walk down there and see if they didn't get destroyed by his truck. When my neighbor ran over this arrow, he broke the knock. We do have a clear winner. This one right here is the hickory bow, and then about 20 yards farther is the Osage. So the Osage is slightly more efficient. See if we get the same result if I do that a couple of more times. For my test of durability, I'm going to shoot each bow 100 times, and then I'm going to measure the set that it accumulates after the bow is unstrung. I made shorter bows. I'm a really tall guy, so I am overdrawing these bows just by shooting them. Now I'm going to unstring these and measure the string follow. It's actually not too bad. I was expecting it to be a lot worse with how narrow these limbs are. Let's see if it's even measurable. Got about a ½ an inch on the hickory bow, and the tips aren't even touching on the Osage, so quite a bit better reading on the string follow from the Osage. Ultimately, the choice of bow wood that you choose to make a bow comes down to availability. I live in Alaska, so the only thing that's really available to me is birch, and I love birch. Some of my favorite bows are made out of birch. If I had access to any wood and money wasn't an issue and availability wasn't an issue, I'd have to say that I like Osage the best because it's prettier, it carves a little bit nicer with the draw knife, it seems to shoot a little bit better. I'm getting slightly farther on my flight archery tests with the Osage bow than I am with the hickory bow. And I also think that it's probably more rot resistant, which is a factor living here in Alaska where it rains almost every day in the hunting season. But both are great. All the bow woods that I've used have been fantastic, and it's just a learning curve of learning how to use the wood that you're making bows out of. And then another factor is bow design. If you were using a really tension-strong wood like hickory, you'd probably want to go a little bit wider than you would want to go with an Osage. And because I did identical designs with these bows, the Osage is slightly better performing this hickory. But the inequalities are so small, they could literally be down to the fact that this bow is drawing 1 pound heavier than this bow. And if I could choose any bow to work with now, it wouldn't even be one of these. It would be something that I haven't tried yet, like maybe yew or maybe black locust. I'll show you guys what I'm excited to get working on next. I've been waiting for the snow to thaw so I can start building myself a small log cabin. Last fall, I cut down a bunch of trees. I stacked them up and I covered them with a tarp. And with the heavy snow, the tarp was buried for months and months. And I've been so anxious to get started to build my little log cabin. The ground needs to thaw, which will take probably 1 more week or so of rain. and I need to be able to get the ice off of this side of the tarp. So I'll probably do one more smaller project before I get started on my cabin building series. If you want to stick around for that, hit that subscribe button. If you want to see more bow building videos, you can click on this right here. Thanks for watching. See you guys next week.